Hello and welcome to the final episode of the KurosawaCast. I am as ever your host, Rob, and I'm joined as ever by my friend Craig. Hello, Craig. How are you
Good
today?
morning. I'm good. Very, very good.
For those who are coming in now on the final episode, as we look at Kurosawa's 30th and final film, Madadayo, the setup for the podcast, the redundant setup for the podcast is that Craig has never seen a Kurosawa film before. Now he's seen all of them, but he had never seen one before. It's completely redundant. He had never seen one before, and I had seen all of them, which previously I could lord over him, but now he is equal. He is ascended. So we have, you've 100%ed it. You've done it. So first, well, no, let's wrap up. I was going to say first thoughts. How do you feel about the whole thing? But no, let's talk about Madadayo first. So Madadayo, 1993, Kurosawa's last movie, as I said, his 30th film. It's basically a period drama that doesn't necessarily feel like a period drama because a lot of the stuff that's kind of like Japanese businessmen drinking in Japanese houses looks the same now to some extent as it kind of does then, but like you I mean when you sort of see it in more modern films and stuff.
No, that wasn't a that was the weird noise in the background.
Yeah, so you pulled a face. I thought, oh no, I said something problematic there.
No, it sounded like some kind of I don't know, like an animal apocalypse going on in the background.
So it's like 1943 at the start, and this old German professor. I wonder why a Japanese man's teaching German in the 40s. But anyway, this old German professor, he's retiring. He's 60, but he's got this, and we'll talk more about this obviously as the podcast goes on. He's got this kind of cult, like ridiculously dedicated fan club, basically that just seem to their lives. Obviously, we don't see their lives. Yeah,
bunch of table standards.
But we never see their lives obviously away from him, so it's hard to judge. But as far as the film's concerned, these people don't seem to exist outside of this professor, right?
They all seem to be able to drop whatever they're doing in the middle of the night to look for his cat or help him move.
So basically, as far as a kind of plot goes, it's mostly kind of plotless. What happens is he retires. His faithful band of former students, who are all adults, who I guess are all successful businessmen and whatever, they look like they're in their middle age themselves. They basically say, we want to celebrate you every year because you're our favorite teacher. We loved German class back 20 years ago, and we're going to dedicate our lives to it and never speak any German. And
they do one of two things. They either throw him a party, a very formal party with a lot of rituals and the conga, or they look for his cat. And sometimes they help him out with land disputes.
Yeah, well, they're there on call to help him with any trouble that's in his life, to the point where they buy land multiple times, twice they buy him land. But anyway, so basically they hold parties for him every year. We see the first one, which is a lovely long scene, almost like the beginning of The Deer Hunter, but not boring, where you just have this really long scene of these people in a kind of a German beer hall, and they are just they're giving speeches and they're drinking, and he's being witty and they're dancing and they're doing all this stuff.
Reciting train stations.
Yeah, reciting train stations and all this kind of stuff that goes on there. Then we get a period of the film where he loses his cat. There's the land dispute you mentioned. Then he has a stray cat that he loses and he gets very sad.
They test his home security.
They do test his home security as well, but that's before he moves. Okay, I've kind of skipped a bit here. So basically, his house gets destroyed in the war, at the end of the war, in like an air raid. He ends up living in a little shed. So the people come around and they build him a new house. When he gets moved to the new house, they help him with this kind of like land dispute, and they're helping him with all these different little things. His cat goes missing. They spend quite a long time looking for the cat. And then at the very end, we get a cut to sort of 16 years later, and he's now in his, he's 76 or 77 or something at the end of the film. And we basically get this bit where we see the beer hall thing again, but everyone's older, and now it's the 60s, so the women are allowed in the room as well. And
but only to present him with flowers, though.
And but the wives and kids are invited, and it's a kind of a different vibe. And it looks very 60s, and he looks like Hayao Miyazaki now. And basically, the film more or less ends there. He has his final thing. He has sort of I don't know, a funny turn, and his doctor says he needs to go home. He goes home. His hangers-on come with him to his house, even though they should really leave Kyoko Kagawa, his wife, alone at this time. And he's actually got multiple signs in his various homes over the years that say he doesn't like having guests. And he always laughs it off and he's like, oh, I hate having guests. Only joking. But these people come to his house all the time, even when he's like on his deathbed. Then he has a dream where it's sort of implied that he dies at the end. That's the broad strokes of what it is. As I mentioned, Kyoko Kagawa plays his wife. I don't really know a lot of the other actors in it. They're not. Some of them I've seen in other Kurosawa films, but yeah. What were you going to say? It sounds like you disagree with me about. I mean, there.
Broad strokes. Yeah. I mean, this is very, very meandering. Slowly meandering, because you will spend a lot of time looking for a cat, or oh, sorry, you froze. You'll spend a lot of time looking for a cat, or you'll spend a lot of time going through the speeches and then going through conga. It's got a very sort of languid pace to it that's quite charming at times. But yeah, it's a strange one in terms of something difficult to pin down, and in terms of story and narrative. It is got a very, very loose narrative to it, I think. And I find it quite charming, but I can also understand why it's overlooked at the end, sitting at the end of his career, as a film that I can understand why it might not have had a rapturous reception at the time it was made. It might,
Yeah, I would personally. It's interesting as well because, dear listener, dear viewer, this is the first one where Craig's completely withheld his opinion on it before the show. So I actually don't know. I'm taking from that you've got a very sort of like 2.5, 3-star sort of milieu for this one, maybe.
I think, yeah. I think it's fine.
Okay, because I think it's the best of his minor work. Like I think of all of the ones that you'd put in a big pile marked kind of non-essential Kurosawa, I think this is probably one of the strongest ones. Like I gave it, not that these kind of arbitrary start ratings matter, but like I gave it a 4 on Letterboxd the first time I saw it, and when I revisited it this time, I thought, is it going to hold up to that? And for me, it did. And I was really pleasantly surprised that it did, because I thought maybe that had been generous. And I think for me, it's because it's such just a nice, kind of charming, very still. Not, I was going to say it's kind of quiet. It's got quiet moments, but it's also got a lot of loud moments. But it's just a very, like, normally there's always movement in his frame, and normally he moves his camera quite a lot. In this film, not so much. In fact, there are bits where the camera will hold on somebody being still in a frame with no movement. It's quite sparse in places. And it feels to me, it was never the only bit for me that verges on boring is the search for the cat goes on too long.
I thought the first party went on too long.
Okay, interesting. Because I loved that. Like, I loved the whole experience of that. I loved all the little stories and all the people kind of it kind of had that feeling to me of a drinking night developing, and these people starting off kind of very formal, and it kind of going a bit too far, to the point where they're raucous and the military police kind of come in and go, oh, it's just some old timers having a laugh. I really liked all that. Why for you did that sort of not work so well?
I don't know. It got a little bit repetitive, and then they started doing the conga, but I didn't recognize their version of the conga, and that upset me. And I don't know. The thing that I struggled with at the heart of it was the unwavering devotion to their professor. And look, we've already hinted about it, was the idea that he's got this army of ex-students who, at the drop of a hat in the middle of the night, will completely stop what they're doing, send for another 5 or 6 people to stop what they're doing, and come to his house to help him look for his cat. And I don't know. I found it all a little bit. I just found it a little bit. I was. The film is very much "Oh Captain, My Captain," but like what happens afterwards, and it was just a little bit. I found the kind of the army of students. I just found that it just stretched credulity a little bit. How dedicated they were, and I know that's the kind of the point, but I that said, I enjoyed it still. I loved. So you kind of you alluded to the signs that say no visitors, and that's really quite fun. That there's all these visitors, and yet he's constantly got them. And then it's kind of revealed that the reason why his new house is so cheap is that it gets broken into a lot. And there's a scene where a couple of them that are a little bit concerned about his safety and well-being, and his kind of how open he is to getting burgled. They decide to do a test run in his house, and they come in at 1 o'clock in the night and climb over his fence and let themselves in, and the door's like already open, and there's a sign on the door saying burglar's entrance, and it's unlocked, and then there's these little signs in the house saying burglars this way, and they follow it, and they find it hilarious. They're kind of silently pissing themselves, and there's also these kind of little touches where they kind of they even take off their shoes, and they're carrying their shoes around as they walk through his house in the middle of the night, and then decide that actually his anti-burglar measures are quite funny, and they're not so worried about him anymore, and they leave. And I loved that scene. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah, and like you say, the cat bit goes on for a bit long, because they find the cat, and then they don't find the cat, and then they find another cat, and then he's happy with his new cat, and then you cut and the cat's dead.
In terms of this army of adoring students, it does obviously seem a bit incongruous and not necessarily super realistic. So some things I want to say about that are, for one thing, this is based on a true story, and this is a real person. And presumably these people did throw this annual party for this man. The other thing is that we're only seeing the bits of these other people's lives that do touch on the professor's life. So presumably this is happening over time, and it isn't that these people spend all their time in his house looking for his cat and addressing his issues. I think another thing as well is that in Japanese culture there is a much more reverence, not only for old people but for teachers as well, and like people who've taught you, your sensei. There's a whole kind of culture around that. And there's also the fact that this is an old man with no kids, so I think they feel very sorry for him because he doesn't have a family. Because normally in a lot of Asian cultures, the kids are expected to then grow up and look after their parents.
Achida
doesn't have any.
Achida had five children, 2 sons and 3 daughters.
I mean, in this film.
Oh, in the film.
I don't know about the real guy. I'm basing everything on the film, right? Like in the film, he's not shown to have any kids, right? Okay. And in the film, that's why I think that they are dedicating themselves to him, because I think there's that part of kind of feeling sorry for an old man, and a lot of the kind of sentimentality in it that Richie in the Alex Cox documentary we watched says is this sort of unearned emotion. For me, is kind of. Maybe it is unearned. I mean, you don't have to go too far uphill for it. But like for me, it works because inherently it's sad seeing an old man be sad because he's lost his cat. Inherently it's sad because an old man is in a shitty little house because his house burnt down. Those things are kind of like inherently sad, aren't they?
Yeah, and we were going to talk a little bit about the Alex Cox documentary at the end of this, weren't we, as well? And like you say, there's a bit with Donald Ritchie. I'm sure you got some quotes, talks about unearned sentimentality. I don't mind a little bit of sentimentality. It's fine. It's all right to be warm and fuzzy every now and then. And I don't think of that as a fault of the film. It's just like you say, I think it's just, you say we don't see the outside lives of these people or the effect that it has on their families, dropping everything to go look for a cat. But it just was a little bit because none of those students seem to be characters at all in their own right.
No. I've written in my notes, actually, it's a little bit like Sanjuro in that regard. You've got this kind of like anonymous mass of people who just kind of like are looking at a great man and just trying to kind of adore the great man.
Then that it just became a little bit I don't know, the dramatic stakes of the film are quite low anyway, and the fact that he's the only real character, and his character is he's a nice man who pretends he doesn't like company. It just means that the stakes are always very, very low. But it's nice. It is a soft, gentle film about the end of life and about a life well lived and kind of reaping the rewards of a life well lived and sort of living out your twilight days in the company of people who love you. And there's something very, very comforting about that, I think.
Or horrifying, because I, from my point of view, because that's also be too much of a Debbie Downer on the whole thing. But I think that our generation and younger, because we don't stay in the same job for life, because we don't live in the same town for life, we don't live around all the same people. Whenever you go to like an old person's funeral and there's like 70 people there, I'm always thinking there's not going to be 70 people at my funeral. I don't know that many people. So there's this kind of element of these things where it's kind of a very bygone age as well, this idea that there's this like whole extended community of people, of potential mourners for you.
All that century of the self-consumerism and kind of individualized bubble lives that kind of exclude the wider community.
Exactly.
That we're all if we're lucky, we'll have someone who's got enough money that they will, out of guilt, chuck us in a home somewhere.
Exactly. So there is that aspect to it as well, where I kind of look at it and think, yeah, like this is nice, but it's probably not reflective of what my old age looks like. But anyway, putting that to one side because that's sort of irrelevant. I really enjoy. I like. There's a lot of wordplay in it. There's a lot of some of which doesn't translate because it's to do with like specific Japanese characters forming different words in relation. Oh, you've put deer next to the word horse, so that means stupid, and things that don't really translate. But there are other bits that do translate much better and that are kind of fun wordplay. He does come across as the life inside the party. He does come across as this raconteur. Like every time he stands up, he gives these speeches that have everyone laughing, and that's kind of just fun for me to watch. Like I just enjoy this guy and this relationship. The bit with the cat for me is the only bugbear because I do think it just goes on that bit long, and it's a Kurosawa thing that we've seen even in some of his best films and even some of the ones we've really liked in the past. He'll have these moments where he really just pushes it, maybe that 5 minutes too long, but not 5 minutes long enough that it becomes one of those like Family Guy gags where the thing goes on too long that it becomes funny. He just stops short of the point where the thing is just outstaying its welcome.
I think given how slight the film is, I think 85 minutes, 90 at a push would have done it. Like
I think it could stand to be shorter, but I do completely stand by my 4 stars for it because I do just I just really enjoy it. I just really enjoy being in these people's company, or being in his company, because the other people are ciphers. Kyoko Kagawa, totally underutilized as his wife. Mostly cries about, not even necessarily crying about the cat, crying about him, crying about the cat. Everything is about him. There's a sort of there's 2 elements to this which I think also explain the veneration that this professor gets in this film beyond whoever the historical professor is, who I've done no research about. I don't know if you remember, but in the very first episode when I was going through Kurosawa's early biography, I mentioned that early in his career, he and his close friend, who was his screenwriter early in his career, they bumped into one of their old professors who they loved. And there's a bit in his biography where he talks about going out for drinks and catching up with this old professor and how important this professor was in his life. So I think there's part of this film that's probably Kurosawa having these really fond memories himself of this great professor who he and his friend wanted to maybe celebrate more than they did. They just met up with him for a few drinks. They didn't throw him a party. And the other element of this is dying old Kurosawa wish fulfillment film, because what the film ultimately
Definitely.
is it is about an old master having everyone listen to them and just celebrate them, and he's the center of all the attention, and he imparts his wisdom. And there's even bits in the film that are a bit like the most didactic bits of
Well, this
Dreams
is
or Raps in
yeah. Well, I
August,
mean,
where
this
he'll
is
just literally be like, children gather around and hear my advice. Like,
well,
it's
this is
very
coming.
much a wish
This
fulfillment
is
film.
yeah, and this is very much coming on the heels of like the first, like the first major documentaries made about him, and his kind of it's a stage where he's being venerated as in all the kind of he's picking up all his lifetime achievement awards and things like that, and getting younger younger filmmakers to help produce and um, uh, fund his film. So he's being celebrated by a younger generation on a pretty regular basis by this point as well, isn't he? It kind of fits. It does kind of fit with the stage of his career and what was going on around his career at the time, I think.
I do think the ending of this, as I alluded to in my letterbox review, I do think the ending of this is absolutely perfect as an ending for his career, because what happens is the title Madadayo is apparently the reply in a Japanese game of hide and seek. There's a kind of a call of like, where are you? And then the response, no, not where are you ready? Right? Are you ready? And then the person who's hiding says like Madadayo, not yet is what it means. It means not yet. And the kind of the running thing in the film is that this the reason the students bring this up originally is party and everything is because it's this professor saying not yet to death because he loves life. And there is this idea through the film as well with his relationship to the cat and with various other things, hiding from the thunderstorms, that this professor is very childlike as well, isn't he? He's playful, he's childlike, he's a kind of a lifelong sort of man-child character. I guess he's the logical. He's like a retired version of a Judd Apatow character, I suppose. Just man baby, but he is this child in this story saying not yet to death. And the ending, which I think is pretty great, is he has a dream, and the dream is the only bit of the film that's kind of visually anything that would be sort of make the highlight reel, where you get these kind of colors which are all based on often the DVD cover for this film is like one of his paintings, which is of this sun in this very impressionistic sky, and that's where you get this kind of amazing sky. And these children are asking this other child who's hiding, are you ready? And he's saying not yet. Are you ready? Not yet. And then eventually he's ready and he hides himself, and that's the kind of suggestion there that he's ready now to die, that he's kind of leaving the world. And we see these beautiful colors. And I think like if this was a film that was made 6 films ago, that wouldn't have as much poignance. But it's the final film of this guy's career, and it's a guy ending his life saying, yeah, okay, like I've done it now, I'm ready to go, and I think that's pretty kind of a pretty perfect way. If you could design ending your film career, that's a pretty perfect beat probably to end on as a person in your 80s who's only got a few years left in them.
Yeah, it's lovely moment. I'll just, it doesn't make great podcasts, but I'll just agree with you.
So do you have any other notes on this? I'm not sure you've this was one you felt particularly strongly about in either direction, really, is it?
No, not at all. No, this was for me, this was fine. There was I love like the stuff with the stuff that, because it's kind of short, sharp, the kind of the them breaking into the house. If it had been more like that, there'd been more individual. And I like the moment where the arsehole next door comes to explain that he's going to build the big house and block out all his sunlight. And those sections are quite short and sharp. But the film slowed down by the longer sections in the first party and then the cat. And if it had been a little bit more kind of, I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. But yeah, no, I found it very sweet and very endearing. But I don't think it's not a sentimental film, Rob. It's a film about sentimentality.
That's quoting Alex Cox, by the way. That's what he says.
And I it, it's story and drama is conflict, and I think this is about as although there's the ultimate conflict of him sort of, drawing towards the grave, if you like. It's a film with as little conflict and as little stakes in it as I've seen in anything, and it's quite a testament that that it still does. It still is, for the most part, an engaging and kind of heartwarming film.
I think you summed up there why I really like it, because quite often I find the the approach of like, what's the most interesting part of your character's life? Write about that. Drama, conflict. Quite often I find that approach to screenwriting, that approach to filmmaking, to just be very contrived and to be very by numbers. And that's not to say that there aren't lots of great films that follow those principles, because those are the rules, because they usually work. But I quite like it when I see films that don't do that and don't feel the need to kind of have any contrived drama. It's literally just watching an old professor who's quite nice being celebrated by his former students, and it's just quite heartwarming. And it doesn't, there's these little slice of life episodes. I agree with you, like I personally like the length of the first party, but I do think if you were to trim half an hour from this film, from the cat section, maybe from the first party, I do think that 90-minute sweet spot would make this far better. I do agree with you there.
Yeah,
I've got one note I wanted to bring up just because I thought it would make you laugh, which is that the second party, where the seating arrangements have changed, it looked to me like the BAFTAs used to look in the 90s. It just got those like round tables with people drinking at them. But that is not an intellectual observation.
there is a missed scene there. There must be a deleted scene where he's planning out the seating arrangements and the changes in the seating arrangements, and there's maps and floor plans out, and people are standing over them, explaining why this is a much better seating arrangement than the long tables.
I can imagine an earlier Kurosawa film then being a scene about setting the seating arrangement. It feels like a very Seven Samurai thing to happen. So yeah, that's me on this one. I think I really like it, but it is very slight. I think the best place to go from here. Well, let's talk quickly about the Alex Cox documentary, which we both watched. So Alex Cox made for TV a documentary called I hope he didn't have anything to do with the title, because it's the most cliche title of any documentary. It's called Kurosawa, the Last Emperor, and it's from 1999, the year after he died. And Alex Cox, the British filmmaker, has a documentary which is mostly talking heads interspersed with some film clips. Cox, unfortunately, doesn't narrate much of it, which is sad, because whenever he speaks, especially about Kurosawa, but whenever he speaks about any film, I'm always so engaged with it that I'd have quite happily watched a more Herzogian documentary that was just him talking about it.
I mean, it comes from a sort of period in the late 90s where he was doing a few of these sort of made for TV hour-long specials. I know that he did a Godzilla one around the same time as well for the Roland Emmerich.
Right, okay. Around the time that came out,
yeah. So he did like a history of Godzilla films at the time as well.
That's
there was a couple of others, like after he left Movie Drome, and Mark Cousins took it over. He did a few little made-for-TV specials, Kurosawa being one, and Godzilla being the other. There's probably more.
So there's a bit that we've already spoken about, which is probably the standout bit, because as you pointed out to me over message before I watched the documentary, he doesn't contradict or comment on anything any of the contributors say, apart from Donald Ritchie's got some quite dismissive things to say about Madadayo, where he says it's a sentimental movie full of unearned emotional moments, and then Cox comes in with a rejoinder just on the narration, saying it's not a sentimental film. It's a film about sentimentality in a world full of hierarchy and lies, which I thought was a great quote. And he says it with such force that which is great, because if listeners, if you've never seen Alex Cox, you don't know who he is, watch some of his, like, go on YouTube and watch Alex Cox Movie Drome intro. Watch some of his intros to films you know, because they're full of this sort of like pointed, sometimes slightly venomous, always very funny, very well put, completely bullshit free assessments of films. That's really delightful to see. So I love that bit. My other favorite bit in this documentary is that there's a scene where I can't remember the name of the director. He's the Russian director who ended up directing Runaway Train, the Kurosawa script.
Right.
But he's the Russian director's talking about how he was at like a party with Kurosawa at dinner, and Kurosawa's talking about how much he liked Lenin. And this guy piped up to say that he didn't like Lenin. And apparently Kurosawa got very angry because he's being contradicted, which I just love, because I just love the idea that you just do not criticize Lenin around Akira Kurosawa. That is a red line. No pun intended. So that I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed that we've discussed a few times through the pod the idea of these like hipster canon new emergent favorites. And there's a bit in it where Francis Ford Coppola mentions Bad Sleep Well, and I messaged you to say Francis Ford Coppola's a Bad Sleep Well wanker, because he's definitely on that.
Oh Jesus! I've just looked at my top 5.
So yeah, that's kind of my highlights on that one. Oh well, I've got another one, but I'll let you speak, Greg. What did you like in that documentary?
I mean, I liked it. I like hearing Alex Cox speak, and it is a breezy 50 minutes TV. God, this is really, I don't know who find this interesting, but I use this streaming service, this academic streaming service called Boxer Broadcast. It's like an online DVR. So you type in, or you can request things to be recorded, and it's all recorded on the cloud and stays there in perpetuity, and you can just watch it. But the archive goes back years and years and years and years, and sometimes even before DVR and digital technology, digital recording technology. But I watched this on YouTube. You watch the same YouTube, like 6-part, one after the other, and it was obviously taped off telly, and right at the end there's a little advert for Kagemusha being played on Christmas Day. So I was able to look up to see when it was originally broadcast, and that was Christmas 1999. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Paul Verhoeven very casually humble bragging about his Laserdisc collection.
He says what, he's got 6 of them, or
on laser.
Yeah,
on laser. It was interesting to see Kurosawa's daughter talking about a lot of it, and her memories of being on set as well, and her memories of her father, and a suggestion that her mother quite liked it when he was away making films. And I don't think we discussed it on the podcast, or if we did, I forgot it. But the story about his brother who died early, who wanted to be a filmmaker, is a nice bit of interesting biographical detail. There's probably a really good, like, young Kurosawa film to be made about
his brother. Yeah, I did talk about it in the beginning, because it's mentioned quite a lot in his autobiography, and it's a key part of his life. But his brother, I think Hago, I think it's called, or is not only did he commit suicide, but he was like a silent film narrator. And which was a big job back in Japan in the silent era, and the silent era in Japanese cinema went on about 10 years longer than it did in Hollywood. So So one other thing I want to mention about this doc was what a big old nerd Kurosawa is about John Ford, because there's a story in it that, like, it's like Kurosawa's a Wes Anderson character with some sort of weird affectation, where he gets out a picture of John Ford and shows somebody, look at this cool picture of John Ford, look at that cool hat, go and buy me that hat. And someone has to go and get Kurosawa the same hat so he can wear the same hat as John Ford.
That story is like 25 minutes, half an hour of a French New Wave film.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because it references John Ford. 100% would be. There probably is a Godard film about trying to buy John Ford's hat. Yeah, completely. There is another bit I wanted to bring up, just because I don't think this would fly in 2021. There's a bit where Donald Ritchie says that Kurosawa stopped making films when he could no longer use his legs, when he's in a wheelchair. And he says, if you don't walk, you're not a director, which I think is an astounding outburst of ableism that I don't really understand how that made broadcast in 1999. But it was a different time.
It was a different time, you know.
So this is the interesting part, everyone. This is the part I really wanted to get to. This is why we did this entire endeavor, is for me to be able to say to my mate Craig, like, all right, you've seen all the Kurosawa films now. What are your thoughts? I think the first question on that is obviously you come to it. We've talked about it on a film by film basis. What are your expectations for this? How did it meet your expectations? For Kurosawa in general, there's obviously a cultural expectation. He's lumped in with Bergman. He's lumped in with, you know, all of the greats of world cinema. He's in that canon. He's at that kind of head of the table. How does seeing his filmography match up to this idea of what Kurosawa is?
Right. Okay, I'm with you. Well, it's interesting. Both you and I are also kind of doing a lot of what we've been calling homework at the moment, and filling in some canonic gaps in our filmography. So I've watched an inordinate amount of like highly concentrated bursts of Bergman and Goddard and Fassbinder and all these other people that I'd seen bits and pieces of, but never really delved into their filmographies in any depth. Which, you know, another sort of mea culpa. There is not going to be a Goddard podcast to follow this up. I'm just going to put that out there. But you have expectations about them having certain things. So, you know, Bergman, for example, these sort of abstract religious philosophical kind of pondering what's the word I'm looking for,
this sort of very like cerebral, austere,
like and some of them are, and some of them are, and then others are really quite, you know, youthful and vibrant and vital, like Summer with Monica or Wild Strawberries have these moments of life and youth and things like that, and you go, oh, you know, it's multifaceted. Goddard not so much. I think that's my third dig at Goddard, and we're just trying to round up Kurosawa's. Anyway, so my thought was obviously, you know, the big ones, Seven Samurai and samurai films, and I wasn't as aware that there was. I didn't know about the kind of the. I didn't know so much about the kind of the contemporary post-war stories, or the kind of the return to the sort of the indigent and the kind of the lower depths, if you like, and those sort of stories. Or I was aware that he had a couple of Shakespeare-inspired films. I wasn't aware there was a third, and I wasn't aware of the kind of the Russian literature influence as well. So it seemed to be a lot more kind of it seemed to have a much broader base than I was expecting before I actually looked at the filmography and kind of dug into it a little bit. It covered a lot more ground than I thought it was going to. In short.
But how did it live up in terms of your, I don't know, your own headcanon? Does he deserve a place where he is?
Oh,
in
absolutely.
The canon?
Absolutely. You know, like I think there's Francis Ford Coppola says in that documentary, isn't it? When you think about the master directors, they might have 2 or 3 masterpieces, and I think looking at my ratings here, you know, he's got at least sort of 6 films that are undeniable masterpiece, like great films of cinema. They're not necessarily my favorites. The great ones are not necessarily my favorites, but he's got enough bangers to put him on that pantheon, I think.
Yeah, I think as well, like when you get to Der Suazala and Dodeska Den, this becomes less true, I think. But certainly his post-war output, certainly sort of Drunken Angel onto Redbeard, all of his films are pure crowd pleasers. Like if they weren't in Japanese and in black and white, these would just be films you would put on for basically anybody you know and say you'll have a good time with that. That's a cool detective story about a guy who's lost his gun and has to find a criminal. That's about a gangster dealing with you know, alcoholism and TB, and this is a story about these samurai defending a village. They're all exciting, aren't they? They're all these kind of exciting. I think we talked about it a lot when we covered them.
Talked about the kind
most of them from that vintage era. They have real plots, don't they?
Yeah, we talked about the commerciality of something like Hidden Fortress as well, and just how that was a completely unashamed action adventure movie that whips along and things like that. There was a lot more, like you say, it's a lot more crowd pleasers than some of the other names in that pantheon I mean, some of the other names in that pantheon simply don't have the crowd pleasers. You know, he's trying to think, but it spans as well. I mean, Seven Samurai as well. I don't know who you could compare that to, who you'd really compare it to in terms of just kind of these really finely honed, crafted, really sort of thoughtfully staged and filmed and just finely, like, expertly made.
I think the people that have come to mind for me, like talking about it now, and I think personally for me, he's better than these examples. I know mileage will vary for others, but I think of Hitchcock and I think of Spielberg because
Yeah.
of all of the kind of great directors, those are people who were making Spielberg's case, were making in Hitchcock and Kurosawa's case these really finely tuned, perfectly crafted, crowd pleasing banger movies. And arguably Kurosawa's ones, to greater or lesser degrees, have more to say, and they've got like humanism to them, and they've got these kind of sweeping themes that he's talking about, which possibly is not in the Spielberg movies. But but he was making these, like you were sort of saying there, like these perfectly constructed blockbusters is what they're supposed to be, aren't they? I mean, they are just these entertaining movies, and I think the fact that they're in Japanese and they're in black and white is possibly one of the reasons they're held apart in this kind of great canon, because I do think without those barriers, as some people would sort of see them, these would just be like watching Pulp Fiction or Jaws. Like, they'd just be films everyone would have seen. Like, of course, I've seen Seven Samurai. It's that amazing movie where these dudes take on an army of guys for about an hour and a half of pure battling.
Yeah, there is something to be said about this kind of the superficiality of, this is in black and white and it's in Japanese and it's got Japanese actors that takes it from the Odeon multiplex and puts it into a picture house and attracts a different kind of crowd who might be pleased with themselves that they're watching a black and white film with subtitles. And I think it is much more, the films are much, much more accessible than that, I think. They're much more accessible than somebody else who you would put, much more accessible than the people you'd put on that same sort of level, like the Bergmans and the
Tarkovsky and
exactly.
Even Kubrick, I would say. Yeah. And I know Kubrick is very accessible. Like, Kubrick is extremely popular, but Kubrick's films are more cold and austere and distancing, and in some ways experimental than Kurosawa's are. Kurosawa's are very, like I keep saying, they are box office movies. They're big blockbuster movies with plots you could tell someone in a, like there's lots of movies like, I know 2001. If someone said to you, what's 2001 about? That might involve an exploration of its themes or its ideas or something. If someone says, like, what is any Kurosawa film from the 40s or 50s about, you can, it's got a very clear plot. It's got a 2-sentence like strapline sort of like explanation of what it's about. Not to say there's not more going on underneath that, but there's a very clear, just like, well, like I say again with Stray Dogs, just a rookie cop has lost his gun. He's got to go find it. It's very like
a gun that can't be reloaded. Yeah. They were, like I say, much. I feel silly when I say this is why I'm struggling for my my words a little bit when I say they're just really well made, because you would think you talk about filmmaking in terms. I think it's the craft of it in the way that you would think of like somebody who's like an expert in design or like furniture woodwork, that kind of thing. It's that kind of master craftsman of whatever the craft is, that kind of mentality that I really really
respond to in this sense.
Respect and I'm slightly in awe of.
While comparing him to other of the greats, I think that reminds me a lot, placed him in a similar company to people like Kubrick and Tarkovsky in being in a bad way as well. I don't mean to romanticize this. This is someone who, from all the anecdotes we've heard, from all the stuff from his autobiography, from all the documentaries you see, this is someone who had a dogmatic, very difficult, uncompromising approach to making films, because they needed things done to a meticulous amount of detail. There's a bit in the Alex Cox documentary where Tetsuya Nakadai is talking about his literal walk-on part in Seven Samurai, where he walks across the camera, and maybe he's exaggerating, but he talks about Kurosawa spending a whole day with him. And even if that's an exaggeration, maybe Kurosawa spent an hour with him, but I believe that Kurosawa spent time teaching him how to walk in front of 300 waiting extras and a whole crew, because that is completely consistent with stories about, in Red Beard, the production designer having to make period accurate medicine vials that went in drawers that would never be opened, or whole sets that got dismissed. And like in High and Low, I think it was, there was a time where they rebuilt the entire set because he didn't like the light in the other one they built or whatever. Like, there's all these stories about this kind of meticulousness, and those are things you see when you watch documentaries about Kubrick or you watch documentaries about Tarkovsky. That's that sort of minute fascination to the tiniest detail that the audience is probably never going to see. And like I say, that's there are bad sides to that as well. There are people getting shouted at and being made to do things that are probably unnecessary. But I think that's part of where this craft you're talking about is kind of coming from as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to add to all of that, to be honest.
I'll also, just in your sort of personal opinion, has he gotten into a kind of a place where you would list him as a favorite of yours, or is this more a kind of an appreciation that he belongs in the canon? You know, has he kind of penetrated your heart, Craig?
I think some of the films might have done, but I think you get to the age of almost 40, and I think your favorite directors are set. I don't know if you have this. Like, I watch so many films every year, and new films especially. I find it increasingly more difficult to be blown away by new films and new discoveries. Partly might be just kind of the sheer volume of stuff that I watch and kind of I have watched, but I think quite often your favorites are they're the formative films, you know. They're the films that you see at a certain age at a certain time that catch you at the right time. And there are themes as I get older that I respond to that in a way that I wouldn't have done before. Parenthood, fatherhood, obviously is a big one of them. Having like an almost 8-year-old son now, but I don't think he's become one of my personal favorites. Although he, on an objective level, you know, I think he's definitely one of the best.
Okay, so I think to round it off, then, let's give our top fives. So,
Okay.
like, I don't know if we want to do it with a particular ceremony. Maybe you could just go through them. Like, what would you say have become your favorite of these?
Well, I've actually rewritten it twice since we've been started the pod. Because I'm looking
that wasn't because you didn't want to be a bad sleep well wanker, is it?
Oh no, that's staying. It looks like I'm definitely I'm locked into that now. No, I was looking at it and I was thinking about it from a subjective point of view, and I was wrestling actually at number 5 with Rediscovering, which I don't. There's something about it that there's something about its kind of its offbeat nature, and it's kind of and it's sort of it's offbeat nature and the kind of the failures of it that endear me to it. And then I'm really like the story with the father and the son and how that all plays out, and the fantasy sequences with the dream house. I like the imagery of the trolley boy and the funny spouse swapping drunks and stuff like that. There's something about that film that doesn't quite work that makes me like it even more. I'm quite a fan of sort of noble failures in films. So just on a personal subjective level, I've talked myself into it. I think that's number 5 for me.
Okay. I basically have looked at my my letterboxed top
My
5.
ratings, yeah, I've looked at my ratings and they don't match up to my heart.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that my letterbox top 5 is boring, so I'm gonna do what you did and throw in some curveballs, because otherwise we just say the kind of the canon. I think the one that's got a real soft spot for me, which watching it a second time for this podcast, because a lot of them I'd seen multiple times before the podcast, some of them I'd only ever seen once. The one that from his early period that resonated with me a lot, that I really enjoyed both times I see it, and it's got its problems like Tedeschi does.
One Wonderful
is
Sunday.
One Wonderful Sunday. One Wonderful Sunday doesn't quite stick the landing. It's got that awkward ending to it and things like that. But there are so many kind of really beautiful Capra-esque scenes in it, like the bit where they're pantomiming a fake cafe, and the fact that they've got this kind of, in his early films, we noticed at the time going through them early on that he likes to have a kind of not necessarily as a ticking clock, but there's some sort of element, whether it's how many men there are in Seven Samurai or how many bullets are in a gun in Stray Dog. And in One Wonderful Sunday, that element is how much money they've got in their pockets. And it literally takes place over this one day, and they've got this little bit of money in their pockets. And as they go around buying a snack or going and buying a ticket or whatever it is, that money gets whittled down, and you've kind of got the internal thing of, well, how much money they got left, which sounds really banal, but I like that kind of grounding to it. And I like how it does take place in this immediate post-war Japan with a very documentary feel, which is quite free and loose, where you do really get the sense of these young kids just kind of having a bit of a shit time and very few options. And the title is kind of both completely earnest and ironic at the same time.
Yeah.
Like they have pretty miserable Sunday, but also it's wonderful because they're young people in love and there are beautiful moments in it. There are lovely things that happen. So I think it's a really bittersweet little movie. I love the bit at the zoo when they're like narrating, and it's just kind of like, it's not stock footage, but it's very documentary footage of just like animals in cages that they're talking over, almost like one of those like goofy cartoons with the narrator.
Creature and the sort of almost creature comforty kind
yeah.
of. Yeah.
I have a real soft spot for this film. Like this is one of those films that I think for a lot of people would probably be in the bottom end.
This is the sort of film that if I'd known about it, I would have. This would have been a film that I like a douchey early 20s me would have shown to people on dates. I think it would have been a go-to romantic film for me. I think as a look, this is kind of romantic, and I'm very clever and cultured. This is,
but it's got as well. It's got as well, like with Madadayo, it's got the overlong, drawn-out bit with the cat. One Wonderful Sunday's also got the scene where the woman's crying in her house and the water's dripping from the ceiling. That again goes on maybe 10 minutes longer than it needs to. So kind of it is also an early indicator of problems Kurosawa has that we're never going to get over. That's going to be a consistent through line. So what's your number 4 then?
My number 4 is Stray Dog. I like those early period films. I think for me, Stray Dog, it's kind of, it's a 1-2, isn't it? With kind of Drunken Angel. Am I right? Stray Dog comes after Drunken Angel, and Stray Dog is, Drunken Angel is a great film with some real promise to it, and Stray Dog is that kind of, you see it a lot actually in video games, where there's a film that's kind of comes in, it almost feels a bit like a spiritual sequel, and that just fixes a lot of the small issues you have with the first one. And Stray Dog just feels a lot more tight and kind of focused, and it's got the thing with the gun that can't be reloaded. It's got the wonderful stuff with the being busted down the different levels of the police department. You've got all that stuff going in and out of the markets. It's real sort of down, dirty. You've got the early sort of buddy cop formula to it as well. It just, Stray Dog feels like a film that kind of like I said, watching these going through the canon, as we said before, and kind of watching what American crime films are doing in the 40s. Stray Dog feels sort of 10 years ahead, really, of what the Americans are doing at the same time. It's just a really great story, and the ending scenes with the mud on the trousers at the end, and then going into that final fight, it's just really it just moves like a train, that film, and it's really really thrilling. Stray Dog.
It's a great, not a particularly imaginative one, but it's a great double bill with High and Low, because they both have this procedural element to them with the police. They also both have this like exploration of slightly seedier parts of kind of Tokyo and things like that. They're kind of similar. It's almost like a dry run for some of the stuff he does later in those films. I love Stray Dog. Drunken Angel's always been one of my ultimate favorites, because it's one of the first ones I saw, and it always had a massive impact on me how wild Mifune is. Certainly at the end, when his eyes are really sort of like big, and he gives good face in those early films, Mifune, doesn't he? And you get a lot of that in Drunken Angel. I also like those two films because you have a dynamic which is arguably that Shimura is the cool one in both those films. Like he's the like guy who knows better. Mifune's the rubbish young kid who needs to learn, and Shimura's sort of on top. And I quite like that double act and the way that works. For me, I've written as my number 4 here. Again, not based on my ratings, but just on my heart. I think is the highest climber from this rewatch, which is Bad Sleep Well. I think Bad Sleep Well is a film that I slept on. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, this film, and for some reason, until I watched it this time, it's never really blown me away. I've always appreciated it, but watching it this time around, I think seeing his films in succession also gives you a different perspective, because this is the first time I've seen them in a kind of an order like that. There's such a refinement to Bad Sleep Well. I'm not going to talk about it too much because you're going to talk about it, I think, higher up, and we'll talk about it more then. But there's a real refinement, and that thing you were saying about the clockwork sort of precision and just the technical mastery of Kurosawa, I think Bad Sleep Well is arguably the high point. Like I just think it's such a tightly engineered thing, and I think it looks brilliant. It's got a real monochrome sort of the cinematography for it's absolutely beautiful. But yeah, that's the one I'm putting at 4. What's your number 3?
Number 3 is Red Beard.
Nice.
Yeah, Red Beard was I think one of the reasons why I like Red Beard so much was because I was
dreading it.
Yeah, sort of almost 3-hour film about a doctor, but there was something about it's so well set up. The world of the hospital and the mission of Redbeard is so well set up that it just allows for all these different stories within it. You know, the orphan kids, the abused daughter in her own separate wing. You've got some very simple. You've got a very simple, easily recognizable narrative arc with the young cocky doctor wanting to get out, but obviously falling in love with the place. It's just so well realized as a location, and the main characters are so well realized to begin with, that it just has so much room for different narrative within it that I felt, even at the end of 3 hours, I felt, this is perfectly set up for a sequel, a TV series, or whatever. You could spend time in that place, even if the through line is the change in that doctor, and every other narrative begins and ends and is kind of tucked away and moved on from. But it was so. I think it's possibly Mifune's best performance as well. He's just really good in it. I don't know. It just it sideswiped me a little bit, and I really liked it.
Yeah, it arbitrarily hasn't made my hastily cobbled together list here today, but this is another one like Bad Sleep Well that I didn't really have strong previous opinions about. There's absolutely shot up in my estimations. I was also dreading watching it, even though I've seen it before and knew it was good. But it's that whole thing of it being long and it being this like period medical epic, and you're sort of a bit sniffy about maybe how dry that might be, and it isn't that at all. And it's interesting to talk about it on an episode where we talked about Madadayo, because they're superficially similar in a few ways. They're episodic. There's not really an overarching plot, and they're about this sensei who's wise and knows a lot of stuff, and these other people in his orbit. But the key difference, as you already alluded to, is that it's about the student who learns and changes and grows, which is something Madadayo doesn't have. Madadayo is like Redbeard if the character Redbeard was the most important part of Redbeard, which he isn't. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that elevates it. You've got these other people who are actually changing and developing as it goes on. My number 3 is Ikiru, which I know we're now heading into the actual established boring people canon when I say that. But it's such a masterfully just moving film. I think Shimura's performance in that is out of this world. I know Kurosawa's quite sniffy about it, and I think Donald Ritchie's quite sniffy about it as well, it being a bit overdone. I don't see it that way. I think I guess it could verge on sentimental, but I think he's there's something about Shimura when he wells up and he's got tears in his eyes and he looks all kind of pathetic at the camera. It really hits my heart, like watching. I don't know if you've seen the De Sica film Umberto D yet. In your travels, but it reminds me a little bit actually of Ikiru. These kind of post-war realist films with an old man who just absolutely breaks your heart. Yeah, I find it really powerfully moving. I love the change that happens midway through, or kind of in the second half, where suddenly we go, oh no, actually he died now, and we're at his funeral. And then you get, again, a bit like Madadayo, you get a long sequence that is just some people undergoing a kind of a rite, and they sit down and they talk about it.
For me, I do really like Akira, but for me, that what you just described as what you really like is the thing that kind of edges it out of my top 5, because it gets to one of the things that we have brought up and noticed watching through these films is the occasional. Well, no, it's not occasional. It happens more or less in every film. There's always something that goes on in a Kurosawa film that would be more interesting to see than to hear people talk about, or even in the worst cases in the early films in Tiger's Tail, or read about in a long scroll. And for me that shift, I think maybe the tonal shift was something I wasn't expecting, and it threw me. And if I watched it again, I'd be kinder to it. But there was the thing about it was I was so enamored by Shimura's character that I didn't want to lose him for 20 minutes halfway through the film and have people just talk about him.
I think for me, like, because I see what you're saying. I think that Kurosawa often has a big point or a big idea that he wants to make, and often that's a kind of contemporary political problem or something he sees as a social ill.
And this is where he sits everybody down
and he sits everyone down and he tells them about it. And I think the reason it works so well in Ikiru, in my opinion, is because we see in the first half it's set up that this is a man who's trying to do the right thing, who's trying to do something nice to the community, who seems like a very good person. He seems like a person who's lived a kind of wasted life, who really wants to do good. And then in the second half, when they're sitting around talking about him, that's where Kurosawa's critiquing society. But it's really effective because you're watching these people take credit for what he did, talk up their own roles in these kind of business elites and local government, kowtowing to the mayor and whoever else, and the all of this aspect to it that's frustrating, because you're watching it having seen this guy and knowing his intentions and knowing what he's trying to do, and then watching how futile it is to try and get things done, and how hard it is, how all of the problems that are affecting why it's so hard for him to do it in the first place, all these kind of honchos and bigwigs and the kowtowing and all the people just going along with whatever they say, and all of this. That really brings that to life, because I think that's relatable as well. There's something about Ikiru where none of that's changed. It might be about post-war Japan, but if you've worked in any hierarchy, if you've worked in any business, if you know that there are people like this, and these are the people who kind of reach top positions a lot of the time, and it's just kind of a fact of life. And I think Ikiru paints that really beautifully. What's your number 2?
Seven Samurai.
Excellent.
Number two, I think I mean, one of the things I'm not wasn't overly keen on a lot of the samurai films. Well, not overly keen. I like, they're good and I like them, but I don't think they'd ever be my go-to. The samurai films of Kurosawa. If I had to sit down and watch one, I would always go for one of the more contemporaneous. I would 9 times out of 10 probably pick a contemporaneous one than one of the period pieces. Red Beard aside. But Seven Samurai, I think, is undeniable in just how wonderfully constructed it is, and like just a complete, not a misstep in over 3.5 hours. Like how difficult it is to maintain momentum in a film for that long. It's an hour of just assembling the team. And all of that stuff is completely enthralling and just so much fun when they go into town to pick people and they're kind of testing people, and you get some people are right and some people are. I watched Wages of Fear the other day, which is a 2.5 hour film. It's not quite as long, and the first hour of that is just character stuff in the town where they're all waiting for the jobs before they have to take the nitroglycerin on the trucks. And that was similar in as much as you think, oh, this is a film about explosive things on trucks. I want to see them driving over difficult things and wondering whether or not they're going to explode. and there's a bit about, I want to see samurai fighting bandits, but actually there's so few minutes dedicated to that actual swordplay stuff to it, and so much more excitement in the maps and the planning and the geography and the kind of strategy of it all, and developing the characters of the individual samurai and of the villagers. Not to say that every one of the samurai is a completely rounded character, but they are at least at the very least a type, at the very least, and a good 3 or 4 of them are developed enough to really care about. And I didn't do it, although I watched Fistful of Dollars for the Yojimbo episode. I didn't bother watching Magnificent Seven for the Seven Samurai episode, and I watched it last week. And although that is a good film, the kind of the difference is like night and day. Like there's no sense really of how they're gonna defend this place other than being there with their guns and all that. It just is not as engaged. The Seven Samurai draws you in and kind of makes you invest in the plan and in the story, as if you were one of the villagers trying to protect their village.
I think
and stuff like the scenes where they're protecting the kind of the wooden pass coming through, and they're taking the guns out one by one, and we talk about the ticking clocks and the kind of the crossing off the O's and things like that, but there's like multiple ticking clocks in Seven Samurai as well.
Oh, because it's the harvest as well, isn't there? You're waiting till the harvest happen.
Yeah, there's multiple things that
and
just
counting down to get enough samurai. Like they're going to town to get a certain number of them, and then they're not going to leave till they get them.
They start going off, and then you've got the 3 guns or whatever it is. There's so many ticking clocks that kind of constantly make you feel like you're making progress in the film, and it just 3.5 hours. The only thing that you might say that kind of feels like it goes off is when they go off on a raid somewhere, and there's like a little hut, and they're by the water, and one of them it leads somewhere because I think one of them gets injured, but they go off to rescue some people. One of them dies. That's right.
Heihachi, the fun one.
That's the only thing that feels like you're swerving away from the story a little bit but that it's not a particularly long sequence, but it's fun, and it moves, and it's just so engaging. It's probably objectively his best film.
I agree. and it's my number one. So I will talk about it more there, maybe. Oh no, I'll just talk about it now because we'll talk about it now. So basically, I agree with everything you just said, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things in more detail from my side. So I love the structure of it. You've already talked about how it's like 3.5 hours long, and it has these kind of sections. It's got like the first hour where you've got like recruitment, and then you've got like the second hour is like training and planning, and then like the third hour is like execution. It's like fighting the samurai, and it's something.
It's like a CPD day at work.
But it's so enthralling having it in that way. Like it's so clearly laid out. You also mentioned the geography, and there's such a consistent, and Kurosawa does this a lot. He's very good with this, but there's such a consistent sense of the space. You know exactly what this village is like. You know that the backside of it leads onto those woods, and that bit leads onto the rice fields, and there's the windmill, and you know there's a square in the middle, and you know all of the geography of it. And when I talked about One Wonderful Sunday with the money, I can understand how that would sound really boring and really banal. Like, why do you care if these people have, I don't know, 5 yen and now they've got 2 yen? Why do you care? I think it's because when you set these things up in this really concrete, grounded way, they just make you invest in the world you're in because it feels lived in, it feels real. Like if you have a wave of 100 bandits come in and you never establish how many there are, and you never count them down, and there's no end goal, you get lost in like the end of a Marvel movie where they're just fighting 100 robots and there's no investment. By having it be that there are this certain number of bandits and you're going through them and there's a certain number of guns, you're getting them, you always feel this concrete sense of achievement. Every single time they go and there's a cut of them slashing some bandit down, you're like, great, they've got 39 left, these lads can do it. It adds grounding to it. And I think these ticking clocks as well, like getting the samurai, they break everything down into almost like it's a video game, like into kind of mini missions, like little achievements. Because the thing is you're not bored going like, oh my god, there's 2.5 hours left of this, because in the first half you're like, well, they've got 4 of them, and they're going to get another 3. There's always something going on that they're working towards. And I think those things in tandem, the structure of it, the fact that they've always got a clear goal at any given time, and the fact that all of it is so grounded and always feels so real and lived in, is what just makes it so kind of rapturing, watching it. Like I've seen that film 5 or 6 times now, and it's one of those rare films, particularly for a film of its length, where if I started watching it, if I said I'm just going to watch the beginning, I just want to see the intro, I would just sit and watch the whole thing for 3.5 hours, because it absolutely grabs me and takes me with it for its whole duration.
Yeah, it's flawless, I think.
Yeah. So my number 2, and this would have been my hipster number 1, but it fell slightly in my estimations this time around, is High and Low.
Well,
okay.
Let's because we've talked about Seven Samurai, and you mentioned Bad Sleep Well briefly. My number 1, I couldn't draw a line between them. It is Bad Sleep Well and High and Low.
Right. Interesting. So let's talk. So first off, then, I've already talked about Bad Sleep Well. You talk about your side on why you love Bad Sleep Well. We'll talk about that a bit more, and then let's talk about High and Low.
The thing I love about Bad Sleep Well is first of all, it opens so well with like setting up the idea of this company. I love this thing in a lot of these films that I've been watching is like I can't remember the name of the generic name of the company, but everybody knows everything about the company's business, and there's the wedding going on, and there's this little hush about the machinations of what's going on. Everybody's supposedly very formal and respectful, but actually everybody's gossiping and everybody's in everybody's business and trying to share everybody's business. And then you've got the whisper about the boss's daughter who couldn't get married because for some reason she's got a limp. But the bit where right from the beginning where the cake's been brought in, this perfect kind of cake representation of the building. There's just so many kind of narrative elements going on about who's marrying who and what's going on and what intentions are and the death of this guy. There's the mystery just unfolds perfectly, and the corporate setup and the kind of the sort of the Hamlet origins to it all just kind of suggests so many story possibilities to begin with. And then you've got this really restrained performance from Mifune, where he's in the suit and he's wearing the glasses, and he's kind of like, it's almost like his costume's kind of keeping him in. He's got this kind of this secret and this rage and this kind of vengeance in him that has to be constantly restrained because of his position in the company, and how close he is to the family and the people that he's ultimately trying to take down. He's a cuckoo in the nest, and you've got this the internal conflict he has as he slowly sort of falls in love with the boss's daughter that he's actually just using to get close, and it just unfolds like so wonderfully. There's the scene, and it's in Every Frame of Painting video, where he's working in the he's working in in sort of the secretarial area, and he's planting this money on or gold on one of the other executives, and it's just how he kind of works his machinations within the company. It's just such a kind of tight, meticulous kind of tightrope plan that he has to walk, that can at any point unfold. That it's, although it is mainly people in offices trying to keep secrets from each other, there's always a sense of imminent danger and threat that the whole thing could unravel, and it's so well put together, and like his kind of outing, if you like, happens also with a good sort of 40 minutes or so with the film to go, and it takes the film in a different direction to what you to where it originally was as well. It's just a really engaging thriller. I absolutely adored it.
Yeah, there's I remember when we talked about Lower Depths, you laughed at me for praising the blocking. I think so. At the risk of your derision.
No, I agree. Though, you know, I'm all for some good blocking. I just wouldn't have taken Lower Depths as a prime example of that. That's all.
Well, in Lower Depths, that's all there is, because it's very static and quite boring. But like Bad Sleep Well, there is such phenomenal choreography to the whole thing. He starts, I think this is one of the first films where I talked about with Madadayo, actually, it being quite still. This is one of his films where he's starting to slow down and have longer takes and slightly still camera sometimes, or very subtly moving camera. But he'll have this amazing ballet of like it tends to be groups of three people. I don't know why it's worked out that way, but it's very consistent to the film. It'd be three people, and the way that they'll kind of move around the frame at various points, and there's always this kind of triangle between them, and then one of them will be lower down and two of them will be higher up, or vice versa, and the way they kind of Tetris about in the frame is really striking. It's so well done, and they're often in these long takes where they've obviously had to hit those marks, and you know everything you know about Kurosawa at this point. You know they've rehearsed that for days and days and days before they shot it, but it's so well worked out. I also really love, for a film that's so set in sort of offices and homes and these kind of things, you might think it'd be one of the less cinematic or kind of epic ones, but it's got some really amazing just visuals as well. I love the bit where Mifune is in the car on the hill with that guy who's terrified, and they're watching his funeral because they faked his death, and you're seeing through the windshield the funeral again. Like I said with Seven Samurai, you get that great sense of space. Like you really get that sense of where they are in relation to what they're looking at. That's very consistent, and everything feels very lived in and real. But that bit where they're watching the funeral is really memorable. There's that amazing visual where the same guy who they're pretending is dead, where he starts turning up as like a ghost to scare somebody, and there's some really good shots of him kind of looking all pale in the dark, and the kind of headlights shining on him and all these things. Really great visuals. The famous one probably being at the very beginning of the film when they're wheeling the big cake and all these things. Yeah, I think it's great. I love that one. So yeah,
and then I'm guessing High and Low's your second.
High and Low, I said, was my number two. My number one was Seven Samurai. So let's talk about High and Low.
High and Low, I knew that I'm just trying to check back on my notes to remember what I was. The High and Low was one that I didn't make a lot of notes for originally because I was just so enthralled by it. You know, if you take away the fact that obviously the motivation of the kidnapper, the kind from his little room, which seems perfectly nice, is a little bit of a stretch. It's such it does. I don't know. It feels like it does lots of different things in that film. You've got the kind of the first half of it that's all in the house as they're kind of reacting to. Arthur's got a new bag and a sloth bag. That's amazing, buddy.
That was from Nanny Six.
That was from Nanny. Yeah, that's amazing. And what else have you got? A Greg sausage roll. Excellent.
Well, a Greg sausage roll is a Greg sausage roll is arguably the high and low of high street cuisine. So good on him.
Yeah. So you've got the opening, which is all the kind of the that sort of immediate kind of the police are here, what we're going to do, kind of chamber drama kind of stuff. You've got all the really kind of fun, intricate procedural things where they're having their meetings and being given their different jobs to do and then reporting back, and then some of them are reporting back that couldn't find anything out, and then other people, you know, all of that stuff. You've got the scene on the train in real time, the bit where they retrace the steps and find the house with the two heroin addicts and things like that. It just kind of, for a film that is you know, a bit of a kind of a thriller, it wrong foots you quite a lot in terms of changing up the pace or the focus from the family to the police officers, and backwards and forwards again, and it just has a really kind of strong forward momentum to it. I think it's it's really fun, strong thrill. I think you'll have probably a lot more to say about it than I do, but
no, not really. I think you've summed it up. I just elaborate on some of those things, like speaking of these kind of ticking clocks, it's not necessarily so much of one here, but you get this bit at the beginning where it's established exactly how much money this guy needs in order to break away and form his own new shoe company. He's like a shoe executive. He's going to form a new shoe company. And he's got this big amount of money that he's getting together. And then we get a scene where we talk about how he's financially overextended himself. He's bet his house on it. He's taken loans. He owes money to people all over town because he's going to put this thing together. And then we get a phone call asking him for basically all that money. And it's very well established, this exact amount of money he has, exactly how the stakes of that money and why he needs it. He's not just, it'd be very easy to make the film and it's just a rich guy who won't pay a ransom, but we know exactly why this guy is really torn on this ransom. And then during the film,
they don't overplay that, do they? They kind of, that kind of the kind of moral conundrum about whether or not he's going to pay a ransom for somebody else's kid. It lasts for a little while, but it doesn't get stretched beyond.
No.
It kind of it hangs there long enough for you to long enough for sort of believability, because this guy's got his own things going on and it isn't his child, but not so long that you start thinking this guy's an arsehole, he should do the right thing.
And you that kind of procedural element around this money and exactly how much there is continues as the film progresses in the second half, as they're trying to recover the money. I think there's even bits later where they say we got this much of it back, and all. So it's always that very like concrete grounding in exactly what's going on, exactly what's at stake. You mentioned the real time of the train thing. I think that's a fantastic scene. I also want to say it's got another Kurosawa staple, like we talked about in Ikiru, but I feel like this happens in a bunch of his films where there's like the halftime switcheroo and it becomes just a completely different movie now. Because the first half of the movie is Mifune's the shoe executive. He has a moral conundrum. right? The moral conundrum is kind of that always solved in the first half because the child is recovered and the money is given, and that's all solved. But then the second half is just a police procedural with long meetings between departments and cops stopping each other in cars at the side of the road and talking about, you know, just like what they're going to do. They look at maps and they talk about this team's going there and what's this squad found and what's your department found and all this stuff that's really procedural that I love. But it's a completely different film to the one that the first half is. And I do love that switcheroo that he does. And it does give as well, because you watch this one and you see, oh, this one's over 2 hours, isn't it? I think it's quite a long one. It might even be approaching 3 hours. But it always has that momentum because it kind of has that change up and it doesn't drag out the initial premise for that whole length. It kind of solves that story and then it moves on to a kind of pursuit of the guy.
I've just been reminded from some notes as well that Mifune has his best character name in all of the Kurosawa filmography.
King Gondo, isn't it? Or something?
Kingo Gondo.
Kingo Gondo, yeah. Kingo Gondo is a great name. And again, I just want to say, like, again, this great use of time and space, like we talked about the real-time train journey, but also just like there's always that concrete sense of grounded by the fact that you have this prominent house on a hill and then it's looking down and everything, and the house is often visible in the film because it's kind of up there elevated. You just always have a really great sense of where things are and where they're going and why they're going there. Like this sounds like just filmmaking 101, but you watch so many films that fail at this that it becomes something you need to praise, which is that in Kurosawa's films, it's always clearly motivated why people are doing what they're doing, where they are going, what the stakes are. These things are so clear in his films. And High and Low is another great example of that at every single moment. I love it. But my number one is Seven Samurai. High and Low for a long time was my hipster alternate take, but I do think Seven Samurai is sort of undeniable.
Yeah, and I will also caveat all of this with this is my top 5 as of 11:33 on July 31st, 2021. And if you asked if we were to write this pod off and restart it in 10 minutes, that top 5 list would probably change.
And I'll just say, like, my top 5 by letterbox rating are Seven Samurai, High and Low, Ikiru, Yojimbo, Rashomon, which I think we can all agree would be more boring. Because that's basically the established canon.
Mine's Seven Samurai, Rashomon, Ikiru, High and Low, and Hidden Fortress by Letterboxd. So but I think part of that is also to do with alphabetical, I think.
Well, this is my I actually did like a ranked. I have a letterbox on my Letterboxd profile. You follow me, Beams on Film. I have a Kurosawa ranked list where I've put them all in an order from 1 to 30. So that's my top 5 as of my ranked list. But yeah, this is my top 5 as of this morning, as you say.
I've also got a Letterboxd confession when it comes to Kurosawa as well, which is that I have marked as watched the unavailable missing films, but just to try and get, apart from Song of the Horse, because I know that you can actually get hold of that somehow. I've marked the ones that are actually missing because it annoys me that they get put on there if they don't actually exist anymore. But
yeah, that's Those Who Make Tomorrow, isn't it? Which is like a film that he was like one of 3 directors on that he kind of doesn't have a lot to do with. But yeah, I really want to watch the Song of the Horse. So that's Kurosawa, folks. Do you have any sort of summing up of your Kurosawa experience? Was this a good thing? Are you glad you saw all 30, or would you rather have just seen the best 10?
No, I'm glad I watched them all. Definitely glad I watched them all because now I can lord it over my students and not have to quieten down and try and quickly change the subject if somebody brings up a Kurosawa film in class. That's grand. And I think watching all the films of a director in order is a worthwhile pursuit. Yeah, to the point where I think we should do it again, Rob.
We do have plans in the offing, and we're sort of working on that now. So if you've enjoyed this, then please stick with us for another one that we're planning in the coming weeks. As far as Kurosawa's concerned, that's a wrap. I was very happy to revisit most of these films again. I have to say, there's a few in there I will probably never watch again in my life. I'm probably never going to watch The Idiot or Dreams ever again. But yeah, overall, They're crowd pleasing banger films. Out of the 30 of them, I would say, without looking to check in my notes, there are probably at least 20 that are well worth watching just for entertainment's sake. Yeah, that's all from us. And thank you very much for joining us on this journey through the filmography of Akira Kurosawa. Bye.
Bye bye.